I learned to sit with what remains, and the strange thing was, nothing pushed me to leave. I used to believe that whatever stayed had to be changed, that whatever lingered needed improvement, that whatever remained was something unfinished. But it wasn't. Not loudly, not urgently, not in a way that demanded correction. There was no visible discomfort, no emotional escalation, no dramatic unrest. It was quieter than that. It was gradual. It was internal. It was steady. From the outside, nothing looked unresolved. I still spoke when I needed to. I still answered when someone asked. I still moved through the day as usual. Nothing about the surface suggested anything required fixing. And yet, something inside me remained. Not suddenly, not forcefully, just quietly enough to be noticed. I noticed it in the space after reflection, the moment where I would normally try to improve something, the pause where I would once attempt to refine the feeling, the place where I used to resist what stayed. And this time I didn't. That was new. What remained didn't feel like failure. It didn't feel like stagnation. It didn't feel like something broken. It felt present. I wasn't trying to erase it anymore. I wasn't reshaping it. I wasn't translating it into something better. And nothing destabilized. I was still present, still aware, still steady. But I wasn't trying to move past everything. Some things stayed. Some thoughts lingered. Some feelings didn't dissolve. And nothing collapsed. I could move through an entire afternoon with something quietly remaining inside me without turning it into a problem. Nothing demanded progress. It was more like coexistence without resistance, as if something inside me had accepted that not everything leaves. And the more I noticed that, the more I realized something else. How often I had confused movement with growth. How I believed that staying meant stagnation. How I assumed that remaining meant weakness. But sometimes remaining means integration. Not loud enough to interrupt me. Not strong enough to burden me. Just steady enough to exist. I began to notice how much energy I once spent trying to move on from everything, trying to outgrow it, trying to transcend it, trying to replace it with something better, but nothing required replacement. And that was the shift. Everything around me stayed the same, but the way I related to what stayed had softened. I paid attention to how calm that felt, how stable it remained, how little urgency it created. If someone had asked whether everything was resolved, I would have said no, and felt no tension saying it. That was the surprising part. I had always believed growth meant leaving things behind, that maturity meant dissolving discomfort, that healing meant eliminating what lingered. But some things remain, and remaining does not mean failure. I noticed it in repetition. The same memories, the same emotional traces, the same quiet echoes, everything recognizable, yet nothing overwhelming. I didn't need it to disappear. I didn't need it to evolve. I didn't need it to transform into something new. And nothing unraveled. That awareness changed something, because once you realize that not everything needs to leave, you stop forcing departure. I began to see how often I equated progress with removal. If something stayed, I assumed I hadn't grown. If something lingered, I assumed I hadn't healed. If something remained, I assumed I hadn't finished. But none of that was true. The things that remained inside me didn't hold me back. They simply existed, like a quiet shadow that no longer frightens you, like a familiar ache that no longer demands attention, like a memory that no longer reshapes the present. And the more I noticed that steadiness, the more I trusted it. There was no need to eliminate everything, no need to resolve every echo, No need to perfect the internal landscape. It simply remained livable. And in that steadiness, I found something unexpected. Not resistance, not frustration, not urgency, just peace. A peace that didn't require change. Everything continued as usual. Time moved forward. People spoke. The world kept its rhythm. And I moved within it, without trying to move beyond everything. I noticed it in how I breathed, in the quiet between thoughts, in the absence of pressure to evolve. What remained didn't need protection. It didn't need transformation. It wasn't fragile. The schedule made sense. The responsibilities stayed intact. The ordinary details persisted. But something inside me was no longer uncomfortable with what stayed. Not because I surrendered, but because I accepted. Even simple moments felt different. What once felt like something to overcome now felt like something to carry. What once required improvement now required patience. The tension dissolved. I didn't need everything to disappear to feel complete. I just noticed that I already was, and that awareness was subtle. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a declaration. It was quiet. And because it was quiet, it felt lasting. Sometimes I searched for the old impulse to escape what remained, but it didn't rise. Not suppressed, not denied, just unnecessary. I didn't explain it to anyone. There was nothing dramatic to justify, but I carried that calm acceptance with me through the same rooms and the same hours, aware that staying is not stagnation. There was nothing to fix, no internal flaw demanding removal, no urgency to become someone else. What remained was not an obstacle. It was part of me, and part of me does not need to disappear. It moved with me in small ways, in how I responded, in how I paused, in how I allowed space. I learned to sit with what remains without turning it into a problem. The strange thing was how natural that felt. People still spoke the same way. My routine still held together. My life still moved forward. Nothing outward transformed. Nothing dramatic unfolded. And yet, something inside me had stopped trying to escape what stayed. Not loudly, not urgently, just steadily, as if I had been waiting for permission to stop leaving myself. And the stillness of it no longer felt unfinished. It felt complete in its own way, not because it changed, not because it improved, but because I stopped measuring it. Because not everything needs to disappear. I learned to sit with what remains, and I stayed.